And last time you're going to have to hear me say this today. We are going to get started right here at 9 o'clock in just about 30 seconds. Today's session will be recorded and posted to TLMS. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box. And we're going to get started right here in about 15 seconds or so. And it is now 9 o'clock, so I'm going to turn this over to Dan and to Chad, your presenters for today. If you have any questions, use the chat box or the Q&A box. And away with that, I will let the gentleman take it over.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Scenic Solutions is happy to talk about safety today. Just as a little bit of a disclaimer, safety is a big topic. There's always things that can be added to a presentation, and we have limited amount of time here or slide space, or quite frankly, we just didn't think about it. So we are human. Throwing that disclaimer in there, let's go ahead and get started. So, Chad Penix is with us watching for questions today. If you have any questions, please feel free to just throw it up on the Q&A, and Chad can field those questions as they happen. I do encourage you to be interactive with this discussion. It makes it a little bit more or less, it lessens the sting of death by PowerPoint. We don't want to be doing that today. I'm Dan McLaughlin. I'm president of Scenic Solutions, and I'll be doing your presenting today. So the question is why did I get picked to do this? So I've got some certifications. The short story is I've been working in the professional theater my entire life. I've got 30 plus years experience as a stagehand, a pyrotechnician, a theatrical rigger. I'm a professional project manager as well as part of my business. So it really is an important aspect to me that we have safe places to gather. Everybody wants to go home humming the music. They don't want to be humming the ambulance. So now let's jump off of that and continue on. Let's talk about what we're going to learn today. This is a 101 course. I'm trying to keep this into basics. I don't want to make it sound like something that's going to impact your budget to where you can't do it. That's not the purpose of this presentation. What I will talk to a lot in this presentation is housekeeping, but also, you know, what your best practices are for safety training, inspections, fire safety, and then common sense rules and sharing some of the responsibilities of a safety program in your auditorium. Is your auditorium a safe place for people to gather? No, it's a straightforward question. If you're renting an auditorium somewhere, is it a safe place to gather? No, it really is important that everything overhead and backstage is in its place, and it's not going to cause a problem if, for instance, there is any kind of a mass exit to the building. Can they get out of the building? Obviously, fire is always an issue in theaters. We'll address some of that later. My biggest beef when I deal with theater inspections is housekeeping. 90% of the secondary school theaters that I go through, we find paint cans sitting in a back corner. We find a fire annunciator with something leaning up against it, tables strewn across the floor. Some of that is just because nobody wants to take the responsibility to clean it up. But it's an important thing that we need to do. Now I'm going to address a couple of specific areas of housekeeping here. First is rigging. Number one law of rigging is gravity. What goes up must come down, right? So as we're talking about rigging, and this is what we consider the fly floor that you see in this slide. This should be kept clear at all times. You know, the catwalk floors up above this, a lot of times there are catwalks that follow the same levels. Those should be kept clear as well. The only thing that should be stored on those catwalks would be stage weights. We keep these areas clear. If your flymen are running around trying to pull these lines in and out very quickly in the dark, it's important that they're not tripping over things on the floor when they're trying to get to the next line set to do their cue. The stage weight, these things right here, these stack on what we call the arbor. They weigh about 40 pounds a piece and they're made out of pig iron. They're riding that carriage up and down, many times 50 to 60 feet. Um, you know, when the pipe on the other end is unloaded and there's no scenery on it, we take these weights off and we store them on a catwalk up above called the loading bridge. There is a toe kick on the rail up there that is designed so that things can't be kicked off the floor. Stacking your weights, you should never stack them higher than that level. Damaged items, tag them out. I don't care if you use a piece of, masking tape or gaffer's tape like we see here, and it's wrapped and tagged. When you tag something out, you should say, do not use, and write who put it down and put a date on it. Now, it's important that it's addressed, right? We don't want stuff to remain um, unaddressed if it's broken. When you're going upstairs, working overhead, working in a genie lift, anything where you're over 6 feet above the floor, tools need to be bagged or tethered before entering a grid area or getting into a lift. There are people working on the ground below. A lot of cases, this is custodial staff in a high school situation, but in a college situation or anywhere moving on from that, people are working overhead. Sometimes we have scenery that's sitting on stage that it has platforms stacked high. A very common injury that I see is people leaving a drill or some tool sitting on top of a ladder. You know, if it's tethered to the person or a bag, that's not going to be something falling and hitting someone. A couple things I want to point out in this picture before we move on, because we'll see this later on. I'm going to talk about the concept of a cable bridge. If you look at this door in the background, you see this little swaggy thing here. There's a cable tied up there. It's not on the floor. This is an area of egress going in and out of the theater. If everybody has to leave the stage very quickly, we do not want a tripping hazards in our doorways. So we take our cables and we tie them up to the wall and get them up over the door. You can do the same thing with your systems pipes in your fly system. If you have one, um, you know, tie those up and get them up over the stage. Get as many cables uh, away from areas on the floor as you can. If you have to designate one area to pile cable, that happens, but don't put it in the areas where folks are trying to work and have to cross frequently. If you're going up in any of these lifts, uh, I really suggest have a set of shelves or a locker or some system involved. We use what we call an impound shelf. It's just a simple IKEA set of shelves next to the doorway going into the grid area. People can put their billfolds, their phones, their glasses, if they're not tethered, whatever is loose on their body on that shelf before they go out and walk out over the stage area. Um, Like I said, it's common sense stuff. What goes up must come down. Gravity's a law. And housekeeping is really the key to this. Next, we're going to talk about all the curtains that you have in your auditorium. If you're moving your curtains around, we have these system pipes, just like this gentleman is tying a curtain on right now. They usually attach just by same way you tie your shoes. There's a tie every foot, and just by sheer nature of repetition, these things can end up supporting an six, 500 or 600 pound set of curtains, depending on how heavy they're sewn with liners and such. But anytime you move a pipe in and out, it should be dusted. It helps protect your curtains. That if you don't do that, um, it will shorten the lives of your curtains, and it is potentially a fire hazard as well. If you're moving curtains around on the stage, having a big piece of plastic and sweeping the floor before you put it down so that you can keep your drapes in pristine condition is a really great way. You can spend $100 to save thousands and thousands of dollars and keep reusing that piece of plastic for a long time if it's taken care of. Sometimes you do get dust on your curtains. How do you deal with that? Very common. We just take a clean broom. It can be a straw broom, it can be a push broom, as long as it's clean, and you can smack the curtains once they're hung up and get a lot of that dust off of them. If it's really on there, a nice coarse push broom will help knock that off. Um, if we're doing flame treating, we have backpack vacuum cleaners to do that. But in most cases, for high school situation, just having a clean broom labeled "keep clean," that's less than a $10 investment that you can throw in there to keep your drapes clean. Why do we do this? Well, dust is flammable. Your curtains can be what's called inherently flame retardant. That means that the fibers in the curtains are actually made up so that if they catch on fire, they're supposed to self-extinguish in 10 seconds. That's the test the fire marshal will use if he wants to make sure that your curtains are going to pass a flammability test. By the way, those tests should occur at least every 3 years. Periodic checks on curtains without the fire marshal. I recommend that you at least do a clean test, good visual inspection, make sure everything is clean yearly. Now we're going to talk about the electric stuff that's overhead. Keep your cables dressed. That's what we're talking about, going above that doorway in that earlier slide that we were talking about. Keeping those cables dressed is an important thing. Also, keeping up to date on your cables. Cables are so expensive now. Copper is at an all-time high price, so we want to make sure that we take good care of what we do have, right? If you happen to see anything like this fixture here, this was probably circa 1950s, but this is an asbestos lead on this instrument. That should be taken out of service and have your maintenance staff deal with the maintenance of the asbestos disposal on an instrument like that. But what I'm really getting to here, as far as the safety portion of keeping your cables dressed, keep them neat. This big pile in the background, nobody knows what's going on. If something has to be checked, because you have a bad circuit, it just makes everybody's day much, much longer. Lighting fixtures and cable must align with other rigging. So we've got all those pipes overhead, and a lot of times those are spaced at about 1 foot centers from pipe to pipe to pipe. When you hang your electrics, they need to clear the other pipes. So you don't want to have curtain hung right up against your lighting fixtures. if they're old fixtures like the one in the picture, it generates a lot of heat. It's probably got a 1,000-watt light bulb in it. It will burn a hole through your curtain, inherently flame retardant or not. So then you've got a curtain that is structurally unsound because it's got a big burn hole in it. If it's colored, it's going to show up. If it's black, not so much. And then let's talk about our cable crossover. We talked about our crossovers a little bit, but I want to talk about your connectors. It's very common that we see cables, don't use what we call zip cable. That's speaker wire to conductor. There's no ground on it. Low budget situations, I see where that's used all the time and it's not recommended. Once again, it's got no ground. If it has any exposure to moisture, it's a huge safety problem. The connectors that you see in this picture here, this is what we call stage pin connectors. In aged theaters, pre-1960 or probably pre-1970, you might see this connector that it only has 2 pins instead of 3. 3 is the standard. That middle pin is a ground. It's important to have. If you don't have a 3-pin system in your system, you should consult with your administrators and talk about bringing a professional in and at least seeing what you can do to, schedule an upgrade to your system in the coming years. I know that it doesn't happen right away. If you've got normal 20 amp, 15, this would be a 15 amp NEMA connector here. We refer to those as Edison connectors in the theater industry, but it needs to have its ground lug as well. No ground lug, no bueno. I harp on housekeeping a lot. It's just so important. So we looked at that rigging system earlier. This is a rigging system. Like I said, these weights that you see here, 40 pounds a piece, they're traveling 60 feet up and down. So someone came through here and just decided that they would put their candy bucket and their chips on the rail because they're not using those during the show. Well, we don't know if that's going to get, that could get moved. It could go for a ride all the way up and then come down. Everything should have a place. Keeping those floors swept. This is a really good practice to work into your youngest students working in the space right on through. If it needs to be a cultural thing that when you get into the last 15 minutes of your call or rehearsal or construction, whatever it is, everything that is debris needs to be swept up, cleaned up, even mopped if it needs to be performance ready for the next day. I even recommend mopping. Wall to wall clean when you leave the building. Get rid of the tripping hazards. And I talked about that already. I'm not going to harp on that. Food in stage spaces. It's a real problem. If you get a rodent infestation going on and they get into your sound rack or your dimmer rack, that's a huge problem. It might be to where they just need a control cable and you can't make your lights work. It could be where they eat the insulation off of some mains and cause a fire. We don't want that to happen in our performance spaces. Easiest solution with that is keep those rodents out by keeping the food out. If you already have a rodent infestation problem, then you need to institute some kind of pest control, whether it's through your maintenance or your contractor. I talked about the wall-to-wall clean. We've been there. Okay, let's talk about a safety schedule. This can be a day-to-day. This can be a show-to-show. This can be a year-to-year. you should have a routine and a schedule as far as what it is you're trying to do for your safety. Here's some questions that you should ask yourself. What do we need training for? That's a really good one, right? What do we need to inspect? The training is going to vary by group. Are your students going to be AED CPR certified? Probably not, but your staff should be, right? What needs inspection? Now, we recommend annual rigging inspections for anything that is moving over people's heads. Your students, they're a great inspector. They're spending most of the time backstage. When they're not dealing with a queue, they're often sitting around backstage, either doing their homework or goofing off, right? Well, try to enlist them in the culture of trying to keep the stage clean. Now, it's their space. If they take pride in it, you have a better show, you have better experiences, you have stronger programs. How do we do that? We have an adult in charge, the auditorium, whether it's a sponsor, conductor of the orchestra, whatever. They set the base rules for the day-to-day actions on how we're going to do things. That's a daily schedule. Now, one of the biggest things you can do with your safety schedule is just to make sure that you've got an end time for whenever you're having a rehearsal or a call with your group on stage. If they know when that time is, then that 15 minutes won't just go away. If it's open-ended, everybody wants to get out of the building, and the sponsor's stuck holding the broom at the end of the day and tired and often just doesn't get addressed. Okay, scheduling safety for things like yearlies. That's where you call people like me. I am ETCP certified, which means I had to actually prove a number of work hours in the industry and take a test that I know what I'm doing as far as calculating loads and making stage equipment safe in the rigging section. Don't try to just rely upon it. But there's a lot of stuff out there. There are folks that are willing to talk to you. We are willing to talk to you, and we're happy to have conversations. It's not going to cost you anything for a conversation. But we do rigging inspections, and we actually have resources through an organization known as USITT that we get it scheduled a year out plus. They'll pay for the inspection so that you don't have to. Talk about this guy for a moment. Fire marshal. He's going to be in your building every year. You know, those fire drills that happen, at least they used to happen when I was going to school. But, if there's an assembly that's happening in your auditorium and the fire marshal is there, I would highly recommend that your housekeeping's up to par, your fire extinguishers are tagged, none of your pull boxes are covered up with flats leaning against the wall, and your doors aren't propped open, and all your exit signs are visible. Those are things he's going to be looking for. But stepping forward of that, you can use him as we need to do this because he's going to enforce it. Or if you're trying to buy new curtains for your space and they're threadbare, they're shot, they're shot. You're trying to fund this with your board. They're like, oh, it's been there for 20 years. Nobody cares. Why do we need to change this? That's where he could actually be an advocate saying, hey, none of your curtains have been inspected for flame retardants. They are out of date. They really need to be addressed. And then he can recommend that you approach someone like us, and that funding could happen for new drapes. Fire marshal can work in both capacities. They're an enforcer, but they can also be an advocate. In my 12 plus years as a pyrotechnician, all of my fire marshals were my advocate. We were blowing things up with over, 4,000 people in the same room, indoor pyrotechnics. We wanted to make sure it was a safe environment for everybody. Talked about that last 15 to 30 minutes of an onstage session. Students, teachers, parents, volunteers, anyone in the auditorium. Make sure it's cleaned up. If it's broken, it's reported and tagged. We talked about the leader. Just to go through some bullet points here real quick. Now, what do we need to inspect in a little bit more detail? The frayed cables, broken clamps. Now, every one of these lighting fixtures should have a safety cable on it so that if the clamp breaks, the fixture doesn't fall on people's heads. Are you using a ladder or a genie lift to try to get up on and to focus these once they're at height? And is it in good repair? The outriggers are mandatory if they're part of the lift design, they're mandatory to be there and working. What's your policy as far as who can use that equipment? A lot of places I'm seeing where students aren't even allowed to use a 6-foot ladder now. How is that handled? No, is that parent volunteers that are doing that? Is it maintenance from the district? Is it faculty members? If you have a policy that prohibits students from doing anything at height, you need to make sure that they understand that that policy is there and have a way of addressing it so that the work can still get done. Otherwise, they're going to break the rule. Your rigging, this ETCP that I talk about here with the certification, it's a national thing. People get, we use industry professionals that know what they're doing to do rigging inspections. They know what pieces of hardware to look at. They know where the warranty recalls are, and they know what unsafe conditions look like. We see them all the time, and we try to correct as many as we can. This USITT rigging a safety initiative is what I was talking about getting funding for things. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm just going to press on. Uh, when you're looking at your curtains, one thing that I did not talk about so far was your pipe pockets. So in this picture, this line going right across the bottom here on this backdrop is a pipe pocket. It's got a 1-inch Schedule 40 piece of pipe in it to stretch that drop and keep all the wrinkles out of it. If you have scenery that goes up and down and backdrops, there's very likely that you have a similar system. What happens though is these muslin drops age is they start to dry rot or these seams start to fray at the corner and they act like a zipper. In a catastrophic circumstance, the drop could rip somewhere up higher. I've been in Masonic temples where we see backdrops that are 100 years old. That pipe could just come falling out of the sky. Backdrops need to be checked that they're not dry rotted and the pipe pocket, if there's pipes in, we recommend that some safety pins be put in on both sides so that if it comes down and hits a piece of scenery, that pipe will end up at an angle. We don't want it sliding out of the drop. Okay. Other things in your auditorium. Let's talk about your life safety equipment. Do you have a first aid kit backstage? Is it stocked? When was it stocked? Who stocked it? what kinds of things in your first aid kit do you have that you think you need to have in it? Um, those are all great questions to have for a first aid kit. Working backstage, Band-Aids are a must. Okay, now you have Band-Aids. Then you've got then you've got blood backstage. How do we deal with that? So there's some training that needs to be involved there. Um, you need to have someone in the space that has at least first aid training. Um, but having first aid kits available should always be something that is checked on a monthly basis, so that if someone has taken all of the Band-Aids out, you have them available when they're needed. AED. No, we are talking about public spaces here. You should have it. I highly recommend having an AED in a space. Um, quite frankly, I don't know whether it's mandatory at this point that a public gathering space of a certain size has to have one, but from my perspective, I highly recommend it. And you should make sure that whoever is uh, faculty in charge working in that space knows how to use the AED and has first aid CPR training. Um, we want our audience members to be taken care of just as much as the students that are doing the program on the stage. Up to this point, we focused mainly on the performers and the technicians, but the audience is also part of this. We don't want grandpa coming to the show and not leaving. This is at least a measure that we're trying to be uh, cognizant of that and making sure that we have our inspections done. Fire safety. We talked about the fire marshal. You know, do your own inspections before you ever think you have to enlist a fire marshal. If you're getting ready for a show, before the house opens, you should have have your stage manager or someone walk the area, make sure that all the exits are clear. If there are bars, crash bars on exit doors in the auditorium, that they are removed so that there's an emergency exit. You've got it covered, right? Um, do all of these exit lights in your space work if you lose power? Do you have a way to address the audience if you have to stop the show? I mean, we always try to have a microphone backstage available for an emergency public announcement if we need it. And to follow that up, we have a book with different announcements depending on what the nature of the announcement is. I'll get to more of that in a bit. A ghost light. Ghost light's a tradition in the theater. There's a lot of uh, conjecture about it just because they call it the ghost light. But really what it is a 5-foot stick out in the middle of the stage with a light bulb on it so that when we leave the stage in the evening, we plug that in and none of the dimmer system has to be energized and people can still walk across the stage without being in total darkness. Theater's a really cool place, but uh, we we end up in the dark a lot. Cable sizing. I harped on that two conductor zip or speaker cable that I don't want and I don't like to see at all. But cable sized for the electricity running through it. Um, a 20 amp circuit is a standard breaker in a dimmer system. You can't put anything more than typically 2000, technically 2400 watts through any one breaker before it pops. Uh, most of the cable that you see in here is running 12 gauge that will handle the full load of one of those breakers. Once you start to see cables that are labeled and gauges go smaller by the higher the number. So you see 16 gauge, it's going to be a lower capacity. 18 gauge is lower. Why do I bring this up? Incandescent lights take a lot of power. LEDs don't. We're starting to see smaller cable gauges because copper's expensive. We don't necessarily have the ability to run old stage lights through new cables. They just don't have the capacity for it. Now, an LED fixture will run 60 watts maybe, where you're running 1,000 watts before. It's a huge difference, and that's heat buildup. One of the first telltale signs you can find out about cable size for electricity. If you're breaking the rules and you touch that cable and the insulation is hot and almost sticky, mushy, you're running way too much power through that cable. You need to lessen the load and use an additional cable for part of it. Proper storage for flammables. Now, that's usually a metal cabinet somewhere where you're keeping your flammables stored safely. We don't see a lot of flammables in post-secondary, but the main places I see it is any kind of cleaning solvents and spray paint. Those should be stored in a container that's not just an open shelf backstage. I've harped on the clean pathways. We're not going to stay there. Ladders. And please, please, if you've got a garbage ladder, take a saw to it, cut it up, and throw it away. The last thing we need is someone getting hurt from climbing a decrepit ladder. Rule with a ladder under OSHA is you should have 3 rungs, 1, 2, 3. So this is the highest step that you're supposed to be using on that ladder. You're never supposed to stand on the top. You know, just some basics on ladders. Annual safety refresher for all adults and students working in the theater. What's the expectations? No? Are we going to spend a day actually talking about what's safe to do in the theater? You know, we need to figure out how to do that so that everybody's on the same page, so that when there's a problem, you can say, well, we talked about this the very first day we started. Now, I've been to a lot of instances where everybody's very eager to get into things. You do your casting rehearsal for a play. Everybody has got the script. They're ready to start working on the show right away. Well, stop. Take one period or half of a period even to do a safety briefing on what's expected in that space. Toolbox talks. This is coming from the construction trade. That's why we call them that. But now, if you observe something that's a teaching moment, you need to bring that up with your group. Hey, someone left a hammer laying on that ladder. I'm not going to point out any names, but you know that's really dangerous. We can't be putting anything on top of a ladder. That's a great toolbox talk. How long did I end up talking about that? No, you can do that in a minute. There is something out there called OSHA 10 for theater. USITT is coming to Columbus, not this spring, but the following spring. They actually offer OSHA 10 for the theater as part of attending that conference, and it's a cheap conference to attend. I highly encourage that for key staff members, especially theater sponsors. They get you up to speed on what equipment you're looking at. Outfit your theater to correct safety issues. I talked about some of this in our maintenance, but if you haven't done regular maintenance in your theater, you are new to coming into a theater that hasn't been taken care of for years, or had any significant equipment upgrades, or just the housekeeping is really bad, that's the first sign that you've got some safety issues. But one of the ways to outfit it is to make sure that you've got resources, whether it's from your board, from your maintenance staff, that you can correct some of these key safety issues. That life safety stuff with the first aid kits and so forth, those are kind of mandatory things to have in a public space. Track your safety program. Now, if someone gets hurt, we kind of have to report it somewhere. There's usually paperwork. Um, when we finish up a show, we should try to talk about what we learned about doing it, not just, oh yeah, that was cool, it's all pizza. Well, maybe at the beginning of the next one, talk about ways to improve. Continual improvement is always important. Um, now I'm going to talk about a couple other things, real important. Pre-show safety announcement. I think that this is like once again, I don't know if it's law yet, but it's highly encouraged. You can do this as a recording before you start your program. You can do this as a live mic announcement if you have someone coming out to introduce the event with any announcements there. But one, please turn off your cell phone. That's a courtesy thing, right? Um, keeps the nature of the environment where it needs to be. But the important one is please look around the auditorium and find your nearest emergency exit in the event that you have to evacuate the auditorium. This should be done before the house goes dark so that they can see where that nearest exit is and pre-identify it. Backstage planning and a flow chart. Maybe this, I, I like the stage managers will often keep a book backstage in professional theater, and they have a section in the back that's basically a checklist of what they need to do in case they have one of these events. Performers injured, what do you do? Maybe that performer's a dancer on stage and they've just broken their ankle and they can't make it off stage. Okay, in that event, we probably bring the curtain down and then we can get appropriate staff on stage to help that injured performer get off stage, reset the performance, make an announcement to the audience that we're going to go 5 minutes back in the show, and so will be understrutting or substituting for that person, and then you proceed. Electricity goes out, you might be without a microphone. You have to go out on stage and actually talk to the audience. And most cases, it's a short thing. So, and emergency lighting will come on in the audience. If you don't anticipate it coming on, then you order an orderly exit out of the building. On-stage candle starts a fire. What do you do? Well, candles are an issue. You know, shows like Fiddler on the Roof have candles in them. There's LED candles now. We shouldn't have live fire on stage. If you have live fire on stage, you really have to call the fire marshal to pull a permit to actually have fire on stage. And when you do have fire on stage, you have to have measures on stage. Where are the fire extinguishers? Do you have a fire blanket? Anytime there's fire, it ups the amount of resources and procedures that have to be done. An audience member has a medical emergency. I had this happen on my watch twice in my career. We were running Nutcracker in a downtown venue, and in one instance, and audience member had passed away during the show. How do we handle that? In that instance, Most of the audience didn't know anything had happened until they went to try to wake this lady up. And so we just kind of just let the audience filter out. And then we got the medical people in after we had gotten everybody out of the auditorium. If someone were to have a heart attack in the auditorium, you need a list of things to do there. You stop the show, you bring up the house lights, you get the crew in. Um, but you need to plan for these. You're in a public space. And the thing is they call it live theater for a reason. You don't know what's going to happen. Okay, I'm just going to recap here. Place for everything, everything that's in its place. Daily briefing. What are we going to get done today? This is when we're going to finish. This is what we need to get done. Engage your students. You know, they need to be looking for, hey, your garbage is sitting off stage. You can't put that drink on a electrical appliance. Provide the training that's needed for your staff members and your volunteers. Now, the first aid goes a long way on that one. Work with that fire marshal and depend on people like me when you need us. We talked about housekeeping, best practices. A lot of this is common sense. That pre-show safety announcement and our emergency responses. Now, this is all pretty simple stuff. I hope that I've managed to at least give you some ideas for ways that will help make your uh, performance space a safer performance space. Um, if you have any questions, please use the QR code posted up here. We'll stay online for the next 10 minutes or so, but we are open to questions. That's pretty much what I have for you today. Thank you for attending. I appreciate your time.